I understand that most Guardians don't have every exotic in the game, so I'm going to show you 3 different exotic pieces you can use for this build, as well as a plethora of weapons. We're not going to lock you into one thing, so we're going to make this build very versatile so anybody can pick it up and use it. There will be an optimal loadout for this build, but no worries on that if you happen to not have one of these pieces. Looking at the first exotic, Graviton Forfeit. This is an exotic helmet that anytime you turn invisible, it will increase the duration by 2 seconds, and this stacks with your fragments, so we can push invisibility up to 9 seconds. While we are invisible, our melee recharges faster, our weapons reload faster, and our recovery is greatly increased. With this build, we will be invisible the majority of the time, so it's super easy to get these benefits, and the melee recharge is almost double, so you can constantly have that melee up. The next exotic is the exotic chest, the 6 Coyote. You gain a second dodge charge. Our dodges are going to be making us invisible, so having 2 dodge charges will just allow us to stay invisible even longer. The most optimal piece is the Gerfalcon's chest exotic piece. This is going to allow our void weapons to gain volatile rounds after we emerge from being invisible. If you wait the invisible timer out and you just become uninvisible, then you will not have volatile rounds on your weapon. You have to cancel the invisibility by shooting a weapon, throwing a grenade or something. And once you do this, your weapon will gain volatile rounds. If you're using a glaive, it won't work for the melee portion, only the range portion. When we are invisible and we defeat a combatant using a finisher, all of our weapons gain bonus damage, which is super simple. You can just shoot an enemy, dodge, go invisible, get a finisher on them, and because we're finishing them, we'll go invisible through our fragments, which we'll touch on later, and that will increase the damage output for any weapon for a short duration, as well as you and nearby allies gain a reserve overshield and improve class ability regeneration. These reserve overshields can be deployed by using a class ability. So we go invisible, get a finish, it's going to buff our weapon damage, it's going to give us and nearby allies those improved overshields, and it's going to regen our dodge a lot quicker. Overshields isn't a big issue because we're using the overshield from the Gerfalcons isn't a big deal for us because we're going to be taking advantage of our seasonal artifact to be getting insane amounts of overshields constantly. Moving over to the weapons, you can utilize any bow that you would like. If you have an exotic slot open, I would recommend using the Wishender. If not, you can find a bow with like headstone on it. Works really well. We honestly don't use the bow that much unless we're dealing with like long range encounters. Any void glaives are going to be really good for this build, so the craftable Enigma, but I highly recommend using last season's ritual weapon. This is going to be guaranteed rolls, which is going to give us destabilizing rounds, which means our final blows cause nearby targets to become volatile, and defeating volatile targets is going to proc our aspect. This does not work for the melee portion of the glaive, it's only the range portion, but once you get targets volatile, you can use the melee portion on volatile targets to become invisible. If you have the Heart Shadow exotic sword that you can get from the Duality dungeon on the moon, this is by far the best weapon you can use for this build, and since it's a dungeon, a lot of people probably won't have it, so no worries about that. But if you do have it, this is going to allow our heavy attacks with the sword. This is going to use 4 ammo. It's going to shoot 4 void balls, and those void balls do quite a bit of damage and they explode, as well as turn you invisible all at the same time. The Shot in the Dark perk from this weapon, remaining invisible, grants this weapon increased damage for a brief duration. And since we'll be invisible pretty much all the time, this perk will be active whenever you have your sword out with this weapon's projectile. So when we heavy attack with this weapon and Shot in the Dark is active, we'll weaken the target to allow them to receive more damage from us. And if you get the Catalyst, this just straight up makes your movement speed faster while invisible with the sword equipped. But no worries, if you don't have the sword, you can always run Black Talon. Black Talon fires a heavy projectile attack that does quite a bit of damage. It's just 1 projectile, and if you have the Catalyst, if you block with this weapon and then heavy attack, it's going to do extra damage. And anytime you kill something with a powered sword kill, you have a chance of getting ammo back. If you're dealing with long range encounters, you can always run Leviathan's Breath, which is good against unstoppable champions. And since we're using Void, we'll be able to deal with barrier champions with volatile weapon rounds. And if you do come across overload champions, champions, you can always run a suppression grenade. And if you have a legendary void sword and you want to run a exotic in a different slot, like for a glaive or a bow, then you can run any void sword for this build. Now into the subclass itself. My go-to super is typically Shadow Shot Deadfall. For our dodge, we're using Marksman Dodge to reload our weapons, but we're mainly using that for the shorter base cooldown. For your grenade, if you're running against overload champions, you should be using the suppressor grenade, and if not, you can use any grenade that you like. I typically run the vortex grenade. Our aspects are pretty important. Since we want to be taking advantage of being invisible, we're going to be using vanishing step, so dodging makes us invisible, and we'll pretty much always have our dodge up. So if you're not turning invisible from other methods, then you'll always have your dodge to turn you invisible. Dodging is going to give us a bunch of different benefits through our mods. Stylus Executioner is the other aspect you should be using. Defeating a weakened, suppressant, or volatile target grants invisibility and true sight. So we have a lot of different means to create weakened, suppress, or volatile targets with our grenade, our smoke bomb, as well as destabilizing rounds from our weapons. And if you have the Gerfalcon's chest piece, anytime you dodge, come invisible, your next void weapon attack will make the enemy volatile. So we have a lot of ways to become invisible by using Stylus Executioner. And if we perform a Stylus Execution, our next melee attack while invisible will weaken targets. Now some fragments for this build. Echo of Persistence is a must-have. It's going to make your invisibility, overshield, and devour have increased duration. We're going to be utilizing all three of these, so this is just going to tack on like 2 more seconds for each one, as well as Echo of Obscurity. Finisher final blows grant invisibility, which if we're using the Gerfalcons, you're definitely going to want to be going invisible and then finishing targets to get that extra damage, which after we finish the target will go invisible again. Echo of Starvation, picking up a Void Breach or Orb of Power grants Devour. This is the only way for us hunters to gain Devour. And Echo of Sensation. Finisher final blows create a burst of void damage that causes nearby combatants to become volatile. So if you finish a target, you're going to go invisible. You're going to make everything nearby have volatile, which if you defeat a volatile target, you'll go invisible. As well as defeating volatile targets creates a Void Breach. Now Void Breaches are great because if we look into the artifact, on the 3rd column we have Into the Breach. Defeating a void debuff target creates a Void Breach while your Void class is equipped, so we'll be able to create a lot of Void Breaches from that as well. And Protective Breach. Picking up a Void Breach gives you an overshield or refreshes your existing overshield. We're pretty much constantly going to be having an overshield because of this. And in that last column we have Supernova. Picking up a Void Breach causes your next source of void damage to create a large weakening pulse. And if you're playing with some friends, you can always use squad goals, since we're going to be performing finishers a lot, and if we have Devour active at the same time, it's going to grant our nearby allies Devour. Some other ones you might want to look at in that 2nd column: Authorized Mods Void and Authorized Mods Melee. And in that 1st column, Unstoppable Glaive. For our armor mods and our helmet, we're going to be using Void Siphon, Rapid Void Weapon Final Blows create an Orb of Power, Heavy Ammo Finder to increase the chance of heavy ammo on kill, as well as Ashes to Assets, gain bonus super energy on grenade kills. In our arms, we're using Firepower, your grenade final blows create orbs of power, and Grenade Kickstart. Whenever we expend our grenade, it's going to give us grenade energy back, and it's going to consume armor charges to give us more grenade energy. In your chest piece, you should have a Lucent Blade. This is going to help your glaive and your sword. And then on the defensive side, if you're having trouble with snipers, you should have a sniper resist. If you're having trouble with melee, you should have melee resist. I like to have concussive dampener. And then in our legs, we're looking at Void Weapon Surge to allow our void weapons to deal extra damage when we have an armor charge. Reciprocation replenishes health each time we pick up an orb of power. Innervation reduces cooldowns each time we pick up an orb of power. And in our class item, we're using 2 powerful attractions to make the radius bigger on it, which is going to allow us anytime we dodge, we're going to be picking up all the orbs of power nearby. And dodging is useful because it's going to allow us to go invisible. We're going to be able to dodge quite a bit, and we're using Utility Kickstart. So whenever we use our class ability, it's going to give us class ability energy back and consume armor charges to give us more back. If you have any of the exotics for this build, it's super easy to put together. I'll leave a dim link down in the description below. And if you like build videos like this, make sure to subscribe and also hit that bell icon if you want to be notified when I upload my next video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.